We're delighted to welcome you to this session of the 15th Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol. Banega Swasth India. It's a pleasure to present today the Earthspinner, Anuradha Roy, in conversation with Ameena Hussein. The session presents a deep conversation with Booker Prize-longlisted writer Anuradha Roy and her evocative body of work. Roy's recent novel, The Earthspinner, is a searing exploration of the fragility of peace. Based on the intertwined lives of a student and a pottery teacher, the tale oscillates between India and Britain and observes how the East encounters the West and the nuances of creative freedom in the face of religious extremism. Roy's other celebrated works include All the Lives We Never Lived, An Atlas of Impossible Longing, The Folded Earth, and Sleeping on Jupiter. In conversation with Ameena Hussein, Roy explores the roots of this tale of immigration, prejudice, and love, and discusses the context and inspirations of a fictional world. Anuradha Roy is a writer and potter based in Ranikhet. Her books have been widely translated and have won various awards, including the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature 2016. She has been longlisted for the Man Booker Prize and shortlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award. The Earthspinner is her fifth novel. Ameena Hussein is an author and co-founder of the Prera Hussein Publishing House, the frontrunner of the cutting-edge fiction from emerging and establishing regional authors. Her novel, The Man in the Water, has longlisted for the Man Asians Literary Award and the Dublin Impact. Her most recent publication, Ibn Battuta in Sri Lanka, is a non-fiction book on the 14th-century Moroccan traveler that won the State Literary Prize in 2021 and was shortlisted for the Gratian Prize in 2020. Please feel free to send in your comments by typing them in the comment section. Do follow our social media handles to get notifications on the upcoming sessions. Please tweet using hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2022 and tag @JaipurLitFest. Ladies and gentlemen, the Earthspinner, Anuradha Roy, in conversation with Ameena Hussein. Ameena, over to you.
Hello and welcome, Anuradha. How lovely to see you, even if it is virtually.
Absolutely, it's wonderful. After, I think, Gaul maybe, or was it Delhi when you visited?
It was Delhi, yeah. It was after that, and it's been too long since we've seen each other.
Absolutely.
So after COVID, we have to rectify that.
Yes.
Anuradha, I want to say it was such an honor that I was asked to moderate this session, because your book Earthspinner, it spun me. It spun me into its web, and I was hooked. I could read nothing else. I could do nothing else but just be at the book. So congratulations on putting out such a wonderful book. Reading a book like yours in a time of COVID, and also in a time when the world is in such flux, where you mesh so many themes together, right? Themes at the far ends of the spectrum, like animals. You have two particular animals that feature greatly here, like creativity, immigration, art, and bereavement, right? I was wondering, the book is set in the 1980s, but it seems so contemporary. So I would like to know how this started. Where did this book come from?
I find it quite hard to pinpoint, as you must know from writing fiction yourself, that it's very hard to pinpoint where or when you began thinking about a particular theme in this obsessive way that gradually builds up to turning into a work of fiction. Images start coming into your head, which slowly seem to develop patterns with each other. And the first image that I had was of this burning horse, and I remember writing a very short para about it several years ago, that this man wakes up with this vision of a horse flowing with flames from its ears and nostrils. And then I had to make sense of what is this horse? And I knew it was a clay horse. And I knew it stemmed from the terracotta horses I had known in my childhood and then read about in South India. So I would say that's roughly where it began. And then the other themes gradually coalesced into what you the ones you mentioned just now.
So were you also aware, when you talk about the burning horse, were you aware of the myth and legend that surrounds the burning horse at that time?
No, I was not. I make pottery myself, so I read quite a lot about it. And I had known that in the South, they make these giant terracotta horses every year for a religious festival. And it had been my dream to go and see those horses being made, which is difficult now because most of them are now made out of concrete or something, apparently. But it was a kind of image that made me want to know more about it. So then I began to read about myths of the horse, the sacred horse in Indian mythology, which roams the ocean floor in some myths, spewing fire, because it concentrates the passions of Lord Shiva within it, and is meant to just keep roaming the ocean floor until the final deluge, basically. And so all these things, which were both mythical and religious and from folklore and from lived life, came together into me thinking, how is this something that meshes with contemporary life and what is happening around me right now?
So I did, after I finished reading the book, I was interested and curious in the myth of the burning horse. And it's actually, for me, I had not known about it at all. It was a totally new legend. And I think, I don't know, who knows, maybe this idea and image of the burning horse came from the subconscious, from somewhere out in the universe. Because when you read it and when you understand what this stands for, you can almost see it's as if Shiva's passions are being unleashed now, and you can almost see the world being engulfed by it. So it meshes all very nicely with what you have.
Because it's also, I suppose, because the horse was so central to life when life was nomadic, when life was pastoral, that it's a strong image in the myths and legends of so many cultures, from Greek to Indian to Chinese, to everywhere. Then, as it's like when you start looking for a particular tree, you just see that tree everywhere or nowhere. That when I began to be interested in this horse, I started finding horses kind of leaping out at me from everywhere. So I realized how central the whole thing is to many, many cultures across. And I wondered how this religious horse could turn into a secular one in the life of the potter who is in my book.
I love what you did there in trying to, firstly, I loved that you take, because in the world that we live in especially in South Asia, religion has become almost a weapon.
Yeah.
And so when you're reading the story and you see the potter, because he has fallen in love also in part with a Muslim woman. So he's a Hindu potter who falls in love with the Muslim woman. He wants to make the horse almost as if for her.
Yeah.
But he has the dream and he wants to make it secular, I think primarily for her. And how the way you use and enmesh all the elements of how he makes it secular. The poet that you chose where the calligrapher engraves are all so meaningful. And when reading it, it seems effortless. But really, was it that effortless for you?
No, I definitely not. And as you will know from writing so many works of fiction and non-fiction, there's a gigantic amount of effort after. It's like, sometimes I think of those gymnasts we see in flawlessly doing these beautiful things, or dancers, but the days and months and years of blood, sweat and toil behind have to be gone through in order for that effortlessness to appear. So not at all. I mean, I I went through many drafts and a lot of agonizing over every single part of it, including choosing which poet it would be and which poem it would be. And I found these extraordinary translations of Khabib by Arvind Krishnameruthra. And he's done them in quite a radical way, not a literal translation, but because Khabib has been rethought and rewritten in so many ways down the centuries, Arvind took those poems of Khabib and did new, fresh, modern, new takes on them. And that is what is inscribed, although Khabib wrote in Hindi or Devanagari script, the calligrapher who inscribes it on the horse is the grandfather of the girl the potter is in love with, and he works in Urdu. So the writing is, and the potter actually doesn't know Urdu, and he just is attracted to the beauty of the lines, which I am too. I don't read Urdu, but the script is beautiful when it's etched onto stone on monuments, or places like the Taj Mahal have so much.
Urdu has the Arabic script, right?
Yes.
Or is it a mix?
It's the Arabic script.
It's Arabic.
Yeah. As far as I know, there's no mix. Yeah.
So I can see also how that sets the stage for the inflammatory incident that happens by having the sacred horse. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to talk about one of the most fascinating characters you have created, which is Ilango. And he is an amazing man. I had so many questions about him because to me, he seemed the true artist. Now, I'm not sure if forgive me, I had to read the book very fast because all this came at the last minute. But Ilango is actually a fairly educated man, right?
Yeah.
And he chooses to be a rickshaw driver.
Ilango comes from a family of potters, traditional potters, which is a potter's caste in India. And most of them, if you talk to potters now from traditional potter backgrounds, most of them don't want to carry on with being potters because it's a very difficult life and it's also very little money. So Ilango's father has, in fact, not wanted his sons to follow in the footsteps of their grandfather or even himself. And he has educated them in an effort to lift them out of that poverty that he has known all his life. And Ilango's brother is not a potter, but Ilango himself feels this absolute unfightable urge to be an artist, and he sees it as being an artist and not only as drudge work that he has been born into, which is why you think of him as an artist rather than
and for me, that is that spirit that burns within him to be an artist comes out so strong that he's willing to live the hard life and to go after his passion. In Sri Lanka too, we have a caste of potters, and it is not a very high caste.
No.
It's looked down upon. So actually nobody wants to be a potter. In Sri Lanka too, you had villages of potters that hardly exist. And the sad thing is that these potters have now moved to concrete and cement.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very similar development here too, because traditional pottery is getting harder and harder to sell. So how do you survive on making traditional pottery if the prices are very low and there aren't any people to buy it? So, and yet Ilango, of course, it's happening 30 years ago. And in that situation, he really does still want to make terracotta pottery, which ordinary people can afford. And the reason he drives that auto rickshaw is really to earn some extra cash.
Yeah, okay. So that even more reinforces that he's the true artist that is so rare to find these days. One of the other things about Ilango was when I was reading him when he was at the beginning of the book, and it's only when I got to the end I discovered actually at the beginning he's quite a young man, but he's an old soul.
Oh, that's such an interesting observation. Yes.
And that's why you imagine that he's a little bit older than what he really is. It's only when you come to the end of the book that you understand, he is not that much older than Sarah.
Yeah.
And even she, I love the way you create your child characters. It is, for me, a very difficult thing for an adult to write of a child character and then to see the character grow up. Did you have any inspiration? Did Sarah come? I know that Sarah went to a Muslim school, as did you.
I did.
And her father was a geologist.
I actually drew on quite a lot of, it's not as though the novel is autobiographical, but I've drawn quite a lot on my childhood years in Hyderabad. What I find interesting about the process of my writing this particular book, as opposed to my other books, is that I was inching my way towards the fiction through a series of essays which were not fiction. So I was really, I had written an essay on growing up in Hyderabad, elements of which are in this novel. Usually what I do is I will write short stories which might build up to a novel. But in this case, I had also written essays on pottery. These were all ways of clarifying what I was, now I can see, what I was thinking of as a framework for the story of this potter. And the childhood of Sarah growing up in a South Indian town is, I drew quite a lot on my own experiences of, going to this kind of school. The school is very closely modeled on a school called Nasser that I went to in Hyderabad in South India, which was a small school run for girls by a very enlightened Muslim woman called Anis Khan. And similarly, the world of the girls who went to that school, this mixture of repression and, glimpses of freedom, all that comes certainly from my memories of Hyderabad.
Did your parents were fairly liberal-minded to send you to a Muslim school, right? Or was it the only school available?
No, it was not. I don't think such things occurred to people. I was not the only Hindu girl there. There were plenty of other girls from other religions in that school. I don't think any of us thought, but none of the people I went to school with, I would say, were, from some very enlightened political class, or that their parents were from some very left, liberal, progressive background. They were just people who saw a good school and sent their children to the school without thinking this is run by a Muslim woman. That didn't cross their mind.
I think it's a little bit like how I went to a Catholic school. It never occurred to my parents I just went to the school my mother went to.
Yeah.
And that was taken for granted. But you also write about something else that is underlying in going to this school. The fear, even in the 1980s, of the threat of violence, which is pretty much still the same.
It's much worse now. It was occasional at that time and something in the background. And I don't know, that school still exists. I don't know how they deal with it now, or whether they have any problems. It's a very huge, when I went, it was a very tiny school. Now it's a big one. But the threat to institutions run by minorities, the threat to minorities existing in a sort of natural way in society, participating completely, all that is much more extreme now. It really was 1/100th of what it is now. We felt it because of the school on certain days, but on the whole, we had a very happy and free time without any threats over there.
So one of the beautiful things also about the book is that because you're speaking through the eyes of a child, you talk about serious and sometimes, violent events through the eyes of a child.
Yes.
So it doesn't seem melodramatic. I remember in the 1980s, in 1983, when we had those horrific riots between
Yeah.
Sinhala and Tamil, if you talk to a young child who experienced it, they thought it was, if they were not personally affected, they thought it was fun because they did not go to school. They had children staying over, and you capture that really beautifully. And I wondered whether, when you were a child going to that school, whether you had any personal experience of.
There were days when we had to be brought home by our parents quickly because riots had broken out in the old city. Hyderabad was divided into a new city and an old city, and usually the riots happened or began in the old city. So I have memories of sudden evacuations, which were extremely exciting for us because, normally our parents didn't come to fetch us. We made our way. It was a very safe city. We used to take public buses. I didn't go in an auto rickshaw like Sarah does. We used to take public buses across the city and get home. There was no problem at all. So when we were safe taking a bus, and as you say, of the riots in Sri Lanka, it seemed like a variation of routine that was quite wonderful and appealing to us.
Yeah, and the people who speak about it, they are appalled that they had those feelings. But they say, this is how it was for us. We just thought our friends had come to spend weeks with us and not realizing the true circumstances of brought them there. I now want to move to another character, the most unusual character, Chinna.
Yes.
And, Anuradha, what fascinated me about Chinna is the way Chinna got lost. Also a horrifying event, right? Another story in itself, a whole story in itself that is alluded to, and you can sense bits and pieces, but it's not that story that you are telling in this book. Tell me about Chinna. I know you have dogs, and they are like your life.
Yeah.
So Chinna is modeled on one of them.
Chinna is actually, for me, kind of, he's slightly idealized in a sense, because Chinna is the Indian stray. He's the community dog who occupies a very special place in many communities. There are many of these dogs I know who everybody has a different name for, everybody has a special relationship with, and yet he belongs to nobody. And Chinna is that kind of dog who lands out of nowhere and becomes central to the lives of several people and brings all of them together where they are divided by many other things, their religion, their identity, their income. But Chinna traverses all those divisions and brings all these people together in the way some of these community dogs do. And dogs are, yes, they are. I have 3, and we have 2 more who come and go every day. So I had to find a way of sort of honoring these many dogs who have made my life quite wonderful over all these years. And Chinna is bits and pieces of all of them.
So do you have a dog named Chinna, or Chinna is his own name in the book?
Chinna is his own. Chinna is Telugu for small. So
yes, of course. Yeah. It's the same in Tamil, I think. Chinna.
Okay. Yeah. So I used to speak Telugu when I lived in Hyderabad, and this Chinna stayed with me. And many little boys would be called Chinna because they were small. And this is the kind of name, of slightly adoring name, that the potter loses his heart to this dog quite unaccountably, because he is not someone who normally notices animals. And yet when he finds this dog, he suddenly feels the need to protect it, and he thinks he will give his life for it. And yet circumstances, make life so difficult for him that he can't.
So,
Someone recently wrote to me saying, I think this book is actually a tragic love story between the potter and the dog.
so I was going to say, I thought what I got was like he poured all the love that he had for the unattainable woman. I mean, I'm happy that that they were able to be together into the dog at first. So all this emotion he was feeling, because the dog also was a puppy. But
Yeah.
more importantly is I heard you say, or I saw it written, that you said how animals are unaware of the politics of life. They're unaware of religion, sectarianism, even art and creativity. And that is true because animals love unconditionally.
Yeah. And I
And-
think that this aspect of Chinna, of being unaware of any kinds of boundaries and of loving unconditionally both the blind calligrapher as well as Ilango, as well as Sarah. This kind of innocence is what is the precious thing in the world depicted in the book, where everything that is pure or innocent can be destroyed by the kind of hatred that is always lurking somewhere in the background.
So in a way, the book actually has been also fueled by what you see around you. So in the 1980s, you had a nascent, incidents of this, and it has just got more and more, not only in India, but all over the world. And that's really tragic.
Yes.
I hope more people read this book and take stock of the situation and say, is it worth it? I mean, what is this? What are we hell bent on this road of destruction?
Yeah.
And it's a wake up call. It's definitely a wake up call to what could have been and where we're going towards. Now, I can also understand why you say that Ilango wants his child to be an atheist,
Mhm.
as well as not being a potter. He wants his child to be an atheist because it also depicts a lot about religion and how religion is used for bad instead of for good. Have you ever had the need to censor yourself when writing? Has it ever come up?
The fear of the mob is always present now. If you're writing, you know that it's at your door, really, because everybody is so much more reachable now. But at the same time, I don't think you can create anything if you're afraid, or if you allow your fear to get to you. So there has to be a certain level of recklessness, calculated recklessness in writing, that even if you are aware of the dangers, you will carry on nevertheless. Maybe there are many things you write that writing and publishing are two different things. I don't think I would ever stop writing what I have to write. But if I were afraid, maybe I wouldn't publish certain things. But I don't think I would, with this book and with Sleeping on Jupiter, which we had discussed earlier,
Yeah.
there were similar kinds of fears. But I just have this kind of, just hope for the best and jump kind of attitude towards life. Let's see what happens.
And has it worked for you so far?
So far, apart from the regular, nonsense people put up with, of people abusing you on social media platforms, other than that, so far, touch wood, it has been okay.
What's your technique for that? Do you just ignore them?
Yeah, I'm not on social media much, so I don't read what goes on. When I do, then I just try to forget about it. Because people, yeah. And I have all these dog angels. When I think of dogs and books, I mean, there's, I don't know if you read Disgrace, Ketsy's Disgrace,
I
in
have.
which the character at the end works in a dog pound. And even now, I find those last pages of Disgrace almost physically impossible to read. And I wouldn't be able to do that to a dog, even in a book. And to me, with this whole sort of violent situation where we are under threat of so many kinds, the Chinna would be the angel carrying the book safely through to the other side, I think.
So far, Chinna has captured my heart, and I think many other people's hearts as well. So towards the end of the book, Sarah goes off to England. Actually, the book starts with Sarah in England, right? Reminiscing about her time. So it's a flashback, but then it continues in a linear fashion. And then Sarah goes off to England. And she meets various characters, including Ilango. Ilango arrives in England. So in a way, it is there that the knots are tied up, that she gets to know what happened to him when he left, when the riots happened. But Ilango in England seems there's a certain kind of space in him, in the sense that there's a slight, is it unhappiness or some kind of misgiving that he seems to have. What is it?
I feel as if, there is this kind of, as if he has faced the flames and they have altered him. He's been scorched by them. He's never going to be the same person again. In a sense, it's like a pot that you make out of raw clay. And once it has gone through the firing, it can't ever return to clay again. It's been vitrified into glass. And Ilango has also been hardened and altered by what he has been through. So even though he is much more successful, much more prosperous, and much more fulfilled in many ways, there is a central part of him which is still over there somewhere on that bank of the pond where he went through what he did.
And I think that comes out very clearly because, it's only in fairy tales that you have people who go to happily ever after. Whereas even Ilango and Sarah's relationship, you can see there is a little bit of awkwardness, tension. It can't go back. I mean, and that's real life. You can meet someone from many years ago and you might have been as close as anything to them before, but when you meet later, it does.
That's why college reunions are such a disaster generally.
Yeah, that is true. Well, we hope some reunions will be good. When you and I meet physically, then we'll have a great time. But you have another character. England is full of characters, full of these interesting characters. Did they come out from your time in England too? Did you meet all these kinds of characters?
Well, you meet so many people through, a lifetime, and characters in fiction come out. I don't know from where. Some of them appear to, they do have fragments of people I may have met or known, but as I write, they are altered by the fiction completely, and if they are going to work in a novel, then they will become independent characters of their own, not somebody I have met and I'm trying to translate into the book. So no, these are not people I knew, but they may have glimpses of people I've known.
So I also thought it was very accurate, the fact that if you're an international student, you will gravitate towards other international students.
Yes.
I mean, that happens in real life. And so Darius and
Karin.
Were the two remarkable people that she meets. And just as much as Sarah is coming from a country which grapples with religious identity and ethnic identity, you have Karin, who is grappling with her sexual identity.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
almost, having to come to terms, something she may never have had to deal with when in Malaysia, but coming to England and being in a new setting and surrounding, coming to terms with a sexuality that can be quite frightening to her as
Yeah.
well.
I think that the whole, when Sarah leaves the country, the kind of distance, of course, gives her a perspective to look at the events of her childhood through a different lens. And meeting people like Karen, who have much more freedom in many ways, and the ability to sort of tiptoe, as she often observes, from thing to thing. These things make her own view of her childhood and Ilango, they deepen the whole process of thinking, which is why the novel is set as a kind of flashback, because I didn't want it to be just a sort of child-eyed, child-like gaze on these kinds of events. But I wanted it to be a more troubled, more complex, more, doubtful, doubting kind of look at the things that may have happened in her life through this prism that she gets when she meets people from this completely different backgrounds with different battles to fight.
Yeah, and even Darius is such a. I have met many Dariuses who, are still tied by their family expectations and who are so frightened to live life because of what someone might say about them or the message that might go back. Now, Sarah discovers pottery again when she's at university there. Did that? How old were you when you first started doing pottery?
I was not as young as Sarah at all. I wish I had had an Ilango in my life when I was her age, but I only started making pots when I went to Cambridge to study for an undergraduate degree. And but I was teaching myself. There was nobody to teach me there. Then I came back to India, and in Delhi, I properly started training under someone, a potter called Anuradha Roy, who had been trained by Shoji Hamada, who was a very famous Japanese potter, legend in his time and even now. And so that would have been when I was in my late 20s that I started learning from Anuradha Roy. And then that's gone on right up to now with different teachers.
And I have seen your pottery on Facebook. And one day when we meet, you're going to make a teapot for me. Okay. Because I'm in love with teapots, and I saw that you had made a beautiful teapot.
Teapots are very hard to make, so they are considered a challenge by everybody. Yeah.
So Anuradha, you belong to two communities, the potter community and the writing community.
Yes. Yeah.
Which one do you engage with more?
I think my my daily engagement is far more with the potter community, because it's a very writers are solitary creatures on the whole. We do our work alone. Our time spent writing a particular book, in my case, I never share any drafts with anybody. So it's almost a secret when I'm writing something which I treasure, to write it on my own until I have absolutely finished, and then I can give it to the first reader, who is always Rukun, my husband. He reads the first draft. So until then, I'm not in touch with anyone about what I'm writing. But with pottery, I'm always in touch with, there's a potter in America called Jeff Deal, who has taught me. And so there's a continuous exchange with him and with some others in Delhi who I learned with. So that community is much more, it's much more a part of my daily life. Problems, helpful suggestions, all that keeps making its way up and down the phone.
I quite agree with you about the way I'm not a writer who is comfortable sharing my work either. So
Yeah.
which brings me to the next question of how do you feel when Rukun reads the final manuscript and you're living there in the same space? What is it like? Is it a nerve-wracking time?
It is, which you must know. I mean, what strikes me as astonishing is how similar are our lives, because you and Sam run Ameena Hussein, which is a very fine publishing company. We run Permanent Black together. You write, and I expect Sam must be reading your drafts as well.
He does. And so I do know actually what I know what I go through. So
yes.
It's
absolutely nerve-wracking, and it is because, of course, you are making him read it not because he's your partner, but because he is the most intelligent reader you know, who will be honest with you. And yet at the same time, when that honesty comes, it can be very hard. It's always like a battering at times, right at the start, until you see the sense of all the criticism that's come at you, and you calm down, and you then get back to working on it again. Is it the same with you?
It is very much the same. And it is and as you say, I like the word you use, battering, because I don't take to what Sam has to say sometimes kindly, but I do see much later when I've had time to digest, and it's not the knee-jerk reaction that I've had, that there is some sense. Anuradha, we're coming almost to the end of our very lovely session. And
there was one thing that I really wanted to ask you, although I know you know, because I've been reading your book, Ibn Battuta in Sri Lanka. And there was one part I was astonished, where you mention you're basically following the routes he's taken, and you are telling us what routes he may have taken. It's a kind of mix of detective work as well as travelogue. Yes, it's also some amount of family memoir. It's a weaving together of all these things into something so flawlessly lively and interesting that I'm absolutely riveted. And in one of those bits where you are traveling yourself in his footsteps, you come to a huge hoof, a horse's hoof. Can you tell me just a little about that? Because I think it connects with the themes in the Earthspinner of this sculpture of a horse.
It does. I've just been told time's up, but maybe we can quickly talk about it. So this is a place called Kudra Malay, and Kudra is horse in Tamil, Malay is hill, and the legend is that there was a huge horse, right, that used to greet the sailors from the sea. So it was on the boundary. And that was governed by a queen called Ali Khanni. And so that's the story of that horse. Maybe we don't know much about it, but all that remains are the hooves.
Okay.
So we'll talk more about that later. But thank you so much, Anuradha. The time just flew. Honestly, it flew. Yes. I loved the conversation. And thank you so much for talking about your wonderful book, Earthspinner.
Thank you for, you're always absolutely a joy to speak with. So thank you for agreeing to this.
So on behalf of the Jaipur Lit Festival, I say over and out. Thanks a lot. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Anuradha and Ameena, for that evocative conversation. And thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. Please stay logged on to continue to watch with us the series of exciting sessions featuring a stellar list of speakers that have been specially curated for you. Sessions are ongoing across all three of our venues, Front Lawn, Mughal Tent, and Darbar Hall. If you miss any particular session, please note that they will be uploaded in our archives on Facebook and YouTube post the festival. Hope to see you in the next session. Thank you.